So imagine 10 minutes from now, right? A billion-ton meteor is just going to hit the Earth.
Right, which is terrifying.
Yeah, completely. But that is the reality. It is hurtling through the atmosphere. The sky is, literally burning. And the countdown is at exactly 600 seconds.
Just a massive physical inevitability.
Exactly. So my question for you is, will your credit score save you? I mean, no.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Right. Like, will international borders somehow negotiate with The Rock? Unlikely.
Eh,
Will your job title or your stock portfolio alter its trajectory by even a single millimeter?
Obviously not. Not a chance.
No, because today on this deep dive, we are dismantling what our sources call the most dangerous, pervasive hallucination humanity suffers from.
And that hallucination is the delusion that our ideas, our categories, and our concepts are as real as gravity.
Yeah, it really is a delusion. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I'm so excited for this one.
Glad to be here. This material is frankly mind-bending.
It really is. We are taking a coalescent journey into what the sources term Part 3, Seeing, Sorting, and Distortion, Why the Eye Became an Empire.
Which sounds incredibly epic, and honestly, it is.
Right. It's like most of us are living as unconscious inhabitants of a mental map that we didn't even draw.
We are just bumping into invisible walls and blaming the physical world for the bruises.
I love that. So today's mission, our roadmap, is to synthesize these concepts of category as architecture and interpretation as action.
And then we'll see how those mechanisms create massive visual fictions, specifically looking at, well, false compression.
Yes, and we aren't just going to diagnose the problem. We are going to hand you, the listener, the ultimate toolkit.
Right, the linear reality deduction and the 4DP framework.
Target, truth,
Yeah.
totally, title. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can understand how we sort the world, we have to look at this meteor test.
Yeah, the meteor test is crucial. It forces a diagnostic check on reality.
Because it's about material translation, right?
Yeah.
Separating meaning from matter.
Exactly. The meteor is matter. It is a physical, undeniable thing. Your credit score, the border, your prestige, those are just meaning.
It's just concepts.
Right. And the core crisis here is that we spend our entire lives trying to use meaning to negotiate with matter.
Or matter to negotiate with meaning. Like, meaning cannot ever dictate terms to physics.
No, you can't politely ask thermodynamics to just pause because the stock market is having a bad day.
That would be convenient, but yeah, no.
But, and this is the precise argument in the text, meaning does dictate the human response to physical laws.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Or let me just voice what I think anyone listening in their car right now is probably yelling at the dashboard.
Go for it.
If meaning doesn't affect matter directly, what about something really visceral like workplace stress?
Okay, that's a great example.
Right, so let's say I am absolutely terrified of a completely fake, arbitrary deadline that some middle manager just completely made up.
A phantom deadline.
Yeah,
Pure meaning.
pure meaning, it's totally abstract. But my panic over that fake deadline causes a very real flood of cortisol in my bloodstream.
Which is physical.
Highly physical. And it eventually burns a very real physical ulcer into my stomach lining. So didn't the abstraction just chew a hole in my physical organ?
I mean, I see why it looks that way. That is the exact friction point we really need to lean into.
Because it feels like the meaning altered the matter.
It does feel that way, but let's trace the actual causality. The abstraction of the deadline didn't magically reach an invisible hand into your digestive tract and, carve out tissue.
No, obviously not telekinesis.
Right. What actually happened is that your brain, which is physical hardware, it's a mass of neurons and electricity, interpreted the abstract concept.
Oh, okay. So the concept remained pure code.
Exactly. The concept itself had no mass. But your physical wetware ran that code, interpreted it as a mortal threat equivalent to, like, a literal predator in the room. And that signaled your hypothalamus and adrenal glands to release a cascade of chemicals. Those chemicals, which are matter, burned the tissue, which is also matter.
Okay, so it's basically like a computer running a piece of malicious software.
That is a flawless analogy, yes.
Like, the code itself doesn't weigh anything. It has no physical teeth.
Yeah.
But if the software tells the CPU to overvolt and stop the cooling fans, the physical motherboard will literally melt itself.
Yes. Your hardware is biting itself because of the software it's running, meaning uses matter as its medium of expression, but they are different dimensions.
Which is why we get so stuck. We try to cure a deep crisis of meaning-like emotional isolation By buying a faster sports car.
which is just a physical object of matter.
Yeah.
You're fundamentally misaligned.
You're trying to use a hammer to rewrite a line of code.
Exactly. And the sources insist we recognize this separation before we can look at category as architecture.
Right, because since concepts are just code, we need to see how this code literally builds the world we live in.
And this requires a massive unlearning of how we think about language. We have this comforting habit of treating categories like, well, passive buckets.
Yeah, like harmless sticky notes we use to sort a reality that was already perfectly formed.
Like you're walking through a botanical garden, you see a plant, and you just slap a sticky note on it that says flower.
I just assume the plant was already a flower, and I am passively acknowledging it.
But the text violently corrects this. A category is not a bucket. It's a design. It's a frame. It is a highly engineered distribution system.
Architecture suggests force.
Exactly. Vocabulary implies optionality. You can choose to use a word. But architecture implies constraint. If you are standing in a room, you can refuse to say the word wall, but you still can't walk through the drywall.
The architecture dictates your movement no matter what.
Right. And to explain this force, the text breaks down 4 specific tasks that a category executes the millisecond it's applied.
Okay, let's go through these. Distributes attention, permission, exclusion, and inference.
Let's start with attention. Imagine walking down a street in a brand new city.
Okay, so I'm just taking in raw sensory data, photons hitting my retina.
Now, before you turn the corner, a friend told you, hey, this is a really artistic, vibrant, bohemian neighborhood.
My brain immediately boots up the architectural category of artistic.
Right, so you turn the corner and you see a teenager with a can of spray paint working on a brick wall. What do you see?
Because I have the artistic software running, the exact physical light hitting my retina is processed as a muralist in action. I notice the vibrant colors, the technique.
The category acted as a spotlight. It instructed your brain on what data was valuable to render.
But if we rewind the tape now, same city, same exact street, same light. But my friend tells me, hey, be careful, this is a dangerous, declining, high-crime neighborhood.
Your brain boots up the category of dangerous.
The architecture shifts completely. The exact same physical light hits my retina, the same teenager, same paint, but I process it entirely differently.
You don't see the art at all.
No. I see vandalism, an indicator of lawlessness. My heart rate spikes, I grip my bag tighter. The category prearranged my sensory experience.
It distributed your attention so forcefully you literally couldn't see the art. And that leads to the second task, distributing permission.
Right, what actions are allowed? The botanical analogy here is amazing. Let's talk about the concept of a weed.
A weed is not a real botanical classification.
No DNA sequence defines it.
Exactly. A dandelion is just a dandelion photosynthesizing sunlight. But the moment you apply the category of weed,
you distribute the permission to rip it out of the ground, poison it, and kill it. The category frames a relationship of justified elimination.
And we do the exact same thing with animals. Think about a mouse.
Oh, the pet store example.
Right. If you place a mouse inside a glass tank in a pet store with cedar shavings and a little wheel, society categorizes it as a companion.
Which distributes permission for care. It
Yeah.
gets veterinary attention, food, affection.
But if that exact same physical mouse, same biological mass, escapes and runs across your kitchen floor,
The category instantly shifts to pest.
and the category of pest distributes immediate permission for lethal force.
You set a trap to break its spine. The biological reality didn't change by a single microgram, but the architecture shifted from preservation to extermination.
What's fascinating here is how this identical cognitive software applies to human beings, which brings us to the fourth task, distributing inference.
The compressed predictive code, I love that term. How does that work?
To save mental calories, the brain hates ambiguity. So when a category is applied, the mind assumes a whole suite of invisible traits based on that label.
It fills in the blanks, like the category of genius.
Right. When society labels someone a genius, it completely reorganizes our future expectations of them. If an average person behaves erratically or speaks in fragmented sentences, we think they need help.
But if a categorized genius does it,
The category infers that it's just the cost of their brilliance. We distribute permission for indulgence.
and on the flip side, the category of criminal, the text says it alters the whole geometry of time around that person.
It creates a temporal horn effect. Society looks backward and says, you know, they always did seem a little untrustworthy.
Right, redistributing suspicion backward and forward. The relational temperature of the room drops the moment they walk in.
Empathy contracts.
Yeah.
And this all happens based on the blueprint of the category before any new evidence is presented.
Which means we are essentially taking actions in our minds constantly. This brings us to interpretation as action.
The text demands a huge pivot here. We have to abandon the idea that interpretations are just harmless, private thoughts.
The quote is mind-bending. Interpretation is not a decorative preface to action, it is action in seed form.
It happens before a hand is moved or a word is spoken. We falsely believe we observe raw evidence neutrally and then interpret it.
But the text says interpretation is a filtering scaffold right at the threshold of perception. Let's make this real for the listener. Imagine you get a text from your partner.
4 simple words. We need to talk.
Right. The somatic response is immediate. Your vagus nerve fires, your heart rate accelerates.
Your stomach drops. Blood diverts to your extremities for a fight or flight response.
But those 4 words are just abstract digital symbols emitting light. Your body didn't wait for external proof of danger.
Your interpretive machinery went to work instantly. Read through one filter, it could mean a promotion. Read through another, it means a catastrophic breakup.
The emotional weather rearranged in a millisecond. The interpretation was the action on your physical nervous system.
Now let's scale that up to an interpersonal level. The classroom example in the text is devastating.
A teacher has mentally categorized one student as brilliant and another as underperforming.
The architecture is fully built. Now both students blurt out the exact same wild, disruptive remark during a lesson.
Identical sound waves.
But the filtering scaffold catches it. For the brilliant student, the teacher translates it instantly into unconventional insight.
So they get praised. But when the underperforming student emits the exact same sound, the scaffold translates it as defiance or disruption.
And they get disciplined. And the teacher genuinely believes they are objectively observing reality.
They are totally blind to the fact that their internal category prearranged the evidence, which makes the phrase, "just my opinion," totally inadequate.
Exactly. Opinions allocate consequence long before they become declarations.
A fractional delay in empathy here, a little extra suspicion there. Okay, so what happens when this flawed architecture scales up to entire populations?
When the I becomes an empire.
Yes. Now, before we dive into this next part about racism and visual fictions, I want to be incredibly explicit with you, the listener.
Very important disclaimer here.
Yes, we are strictly maintaining absolute political neutrality. We are impartially reporting the source text's structural analysis of these concepts, looking at the computational mechanics of meaning-making.
We are dissecting the machinery of the argument, not taking partisan sides or endorsing a specific ideology.
Exactly. So, structurally, how does the text define racism?
It defines it fundamentally as false compression, an interpretive shortcut masquerading as knowledge.
Like compressing a file in computer science. You have lossy compression, where the algorithm just throws away complex data to make the file smaller.
Right, like a highly pixelated JPEG image. The text argues that at the level of human cognition, racism operates as a violently lossy compression algorithm.
It takes the infinite density of a human being, their history, trauma, education, millions of micro-decisions,
And aggressively flattens it into a lazy, low-resolution code based entirely on a superficial visual difference.
a phenotype, an accent, the spelling of a name. It essentially says, I don't need to process the raw file of your humanity. This surface trait stands in for everything.
And brains adopt it because it feels efficient. It offers fast judgment without the exhausting labor of actual vulnerable encounter.
But it installs a counterfeit world. In this counterfeit world, the explanatory box precedes the encounter. You interact with your own compressed projection, not the actual person.
And structurally, the text notes that race has functioned historically as an imposed administrative fiction.
The sources make a sharp distinction, right? Cultures and histories are very real. Geographic origins are real.
But race, as an ontological destiny, is an architectural failure.
Okay, but if the category is false, why do governments and societies still obsessively legislate it, manage it, and track it? Doesn't that prove it's real?
The source text anticipates this exact pushback. It argues that managing the collateral damage of a fiction does not validate the fiction itself.
Let's use the left-handed analogy.
Imagine a society hallucinates that left-handed people are inherently demonic, and they ban them from owning property or accessing medicine.
The category of demonic left-handedness is a total fiction. But the economic starvation is a brutal material reality.
So the government has to eventually step in and pass legislation to fix the housing and healthcare disparity.
They track left-handed economic progress. But managing that material damage doesn't mean the original category was real.
Exactly. It just means the lie was backed by enough institutional firepower to cause physical casualties.
And the text points out the tragic irony here. We have orbital instruments mapping the cosmos.
We transmit data at the speed of light.
Yet we still use primitive, lossy visual shorthand to judge human worth. Our technological complexity has vastly outpaced our meaning-making complexity.
We can send a rover to Mars, but we degrade the person in the elevator into a compressed type.
Okay, so we've mapped the trap, the autocorrect loops, the false compressions. How do we escape? How do we debug the mind?
This is where we shift to the practical methodology. The text introduces linear reality deduction.
Right, and I love this concept. How does it actually work in real time?
It forces us to systematically separate the symbolic layer of reality from the operational layer. It breaks what the text calls the tremor of obviousness.
Oh, that heavy feeling that this is just the way things are.
Yes. To break that, you have to trace the architecture back where you look at the nested holding.
Let's use a tangible scenario. Let's say you keep facing a closed door in your career. You want a promotion, and you keep getting rejected.
The default response is brute force. We push harder against the solid wood.
We send 200 more identical resumes.
But linear reality deduction says, stop fighting the door. Look at the nested holding. Step 1, trace the door to the frame.
The immediate handler, the specific biases of your supervisor, or the HR algorithm.
Step 2, trace the frame to the wall. The broader institutional structure. Why does that algorithm exist? What corporate culture holds that frame in place?
And finally, trace the wall to the blueprint, the inherited category or belief that made the door conceptually possible.
Like a historically inherited, highly specific definition of professionalism or what a leader is supposed to look like.
If you only fight the rejection email, you lose. You have to expose the blueprint as a constructed category.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the most dangerous blueprints are the ones we apply to ourselves.
An internal category like, I am inherently bad at public speaking, that's a blueprint.
And linear reality deduction forces you to examine the internal architecture holding that limitation in place, rather than just swinging blindly at the symptom.
You realize it's code, not gravity, so it can be dismantled. But once we clear the debris, we need a new operating system.
Which is the 40P framework. Truth, target, totally, and title. These are non-negotiable load-bearing pillars.
Let's start with truth. And this isn't about moral truth, right?
No, the text defines it as epistemological integrity. Radical, brutal self-honesty regarding your current coordinates.
Seeing reality as it actually is, not what you desperately wish it to be or what your anxiety fears it might become.
It's the cessation of internal propaganda. You can't navigate out of a forest if you're lying about your starting point on the map.
Which leads perfectly to the second pillar, target. Because once you know where you are, you need an aim. But it's not a rigid plan.
A rigid plan shatters when reality introduces a variable. A target is a flexible direction.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources note that every category carries a silent thesis or directional pull.
Yes, if you don't choose your target, your inherited categories will choose it for you.
If you operate under the internal category of victimhood, your software defaults to self-protection. You'll interpret neutral comments as hostile attacks.
So you have to actively instruct your interpretive machinery on what it's aiming for, like connection or clarity.
Okay, truth and target. The third is totally. This involves that dense term, dimensional homonymy.
It's complex but profound. Think of a homonym in language. The bark on a pine tree versus a dog's bark.
Same word, completely different dimensions of reality.
Exactly. Dimensional homonymy is the cognitive ability to see the layered complexity of a single choice without collapsing it into a binary.
The brain desperately wants things to be all good or all bad.
But operating totally means absolute commitment across all dimensions. You don't just look at the financial dimension of a career change. You hold the relational, energetic, and temporal dimensions too.
You integrate as a whole person instead of leaving hidden escape routes out of fear.
Which brings us to the final pillar, the pressure release valve. Title, or noun shifts.
We need titles to navigate society, doctor, parent, student, but we have to hold identity lightly.
Because if a category is architecture, an internal title can become a prison cell.
If If I say I am an anxious person, I am literally programming my predictive code to always generate anxiety as my destiny.
You're falsely compressing yourself. Instead, you shift to, I am currently navigating an experience of anxiety.
The difference between a permanent verdict and a temporary signpost.
And Rule 3, the holographic loop, means these pillars are mutually requisite.
You can't have a target without truth. A GPS is useless without a starting location.
And it can't hold titles lightly unless you're seeing totally. If one falls, the whole building collapses.
What an incredible journey today. We went from the sheer terror of the meteor test, separating meaning from physical matter,
Deconstructing how labels act as active blueprints, forcefully distributing our attention and inferring the future.
we analyzed how interpretation takes action on our nervous systems before we even consciously register an event.
And then we confronted the violence of false compression in visual fictions.
And finally, we learned how to debug our minds using linear reality deduction and the 4DP framework. Truth, target, totally, title.
It takes immense cognitive labor, but it's the only way to become the deliberate architect of your reality.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I want to leave you with this.
Look around your life right now.
Yeah. If every category you use is a silent argument with a hidden thesis, look around the invisible room you are sitting in. What titles have you allowed to act as load-bearing walls in your life?
And what would actually happen if you woke up tomorrow and realized you had the power to simply demolish them?
The meteor is coming, but the blueprint of your mind is entirely yours to redraw. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.
Question the obvious.
Yes, question the obvious, trace the nested holding, and build beautifully. Until next time.